Officer, I don't know how he could have gotten away last time. He shouldn't even be able to get out of bed.
He's a slippery one, Doc. Don't worry, we've posted a double guard at the door. It won't happen again. Here we go again.
This is a test. This station is conducting a test of the emergency broadcasting system. This is only a test.
Hello, everybody. What's going on? Welcome to September Dirty Rectangles Online. Hello.
Hello.
We made it. Kezia has transformed or / been replaced by Yuffie at this point.
It's true. Yuffie has taken over the stream. This is Yuffie's domain now.
Oh man, thanks for joining us, everybody. Also, we have a really good show tonight and some very cool people here. Not just Yuffie, but also Kezia. How you doing tonight, Kezia?
Well, I'm doing well, Derek. How about yourself?
Oh, thanks. I'm doing pretty good too. We also have Eric Billingsley. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Excited to see some cool games and some cool talks from people.
Hell yeah. Jonah Davidson, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Feeling pretty solid. Made a card game. I'm excited about it, but I'm not going to talk about it this month. Maybe next month.
Awesome.
Stay tuned. And last but not least, the internet's own James. James calling from the 1980 bus.
Yeah, I'm actually still on the GO train. Yeah, James with a last minute run in because my pasta is done. I'm actually at home. I mean, that's obvious behind me, right?
And we're glad
My
you
it.
spectral, strange home.
Extremely obvious, yeah.
Coming at us in 4-color CGA this week. This month.
I have not been replaced. Kezia has not been replaced. We're not replacing anyone. We love everybody. Everybody's great. But we have new additions. We have Yuffie. We have all the wonderful presenters today. I think we have almost all first-timer presenters, other than Jeremy, of course.
He's like the oldest of time presenters. It evens things out, right? That's what you need. A little bit of old, a little bit of new. Before we get going, I think we have some announcements. Swinging back over to our handy computer.
Oh, actually, Jonah, do you want to do yours first?
Yes. So coming up in just a few days, September 23rd to 27th, is the Game Devs of Color Expo, GDoc Expo. It's all online, has been for a couple years now. You can get a ticket for like $20, and there's a ton of cool talks. There's cool projects being shown, a lot of very, very cool speakers. Too many to list here, so check out gamedevsofcolorexpo.com. Consider buying a ticket. And also just helping out a very cool event.
Yeah.
With some further announcements.
James, are you gonna take us on our monthly tour to
the
Hand-Eye website?
Yes, thanks to our friends at the Hand-Eye Society. I think we're still friends. I haven't seen them in person for a long time. But I talk to them online occasionally. I mean, that's all we're mostly doing most of the time, other than when we had our barbecue last month, which is uploaded to YouTube now because everybody wants to check that out.
If you want to watch some incomprehensible nonsense
there's some gems in there. There's some burger shots. There's Bowie playing Kirby. I think there's a lot of heartwarming moments in there. But yes, please. Probably not a great watch from start to end. But Hand-Eye Society has something that will be a great watch from start to end. Their Wordplay 2021. It's ongoing. It's coming. It's flowing. The deadline is September the 17th. So Friday. So yes, if you want to get in on that, of course, you can find more information about that on their website, handeyeSociety.com. And they've also thankfully listed some other things, reminding us that the big con came out recently. Dave Proctor was one of the, I think the first Dirty Rectangles Online guests that we ever had.
Think
When
so.
we started doing these on Twitch, because we were not allowed to do them in person anymore for public health. But yes, their game is out now. Not just made by Dave Proctor, but he was, the head of that team, and all the other lovely people that worked on it did a lot of great work.
Tabby's going to be talking about that later, so stay tuned.
Oh, foreshadowing. There's some other stuff going on in Montreal as well with Pixels. Devin has his Discord coming out, talking about VTubers and stuff.
We're just scrolling through a Twitter feed at this point.
Well, this is, I mean, look, these are apparently Hans and Johns, okay? These are not just a Twitter feed. Do not belittle the Anti-Society newsletter, please. No, there was another thing that I noticed in here that I thought would be of great interest, that there's apparently a FrogCon. We all love frogs, don't we? I love frogs. And apparently FrogCon 2021 is coming out. They're looking for presenters. Are you a Froggy game creator? Share your work. You're making a game that kind of resembles this in some way, and that it has a frog. But yes, that's all I had.
Thank you, James. Cool. All right, we're back to our regular shot here. Thank you for our tour around the announcements. If you have an announcement, feel free to toss it in the chat or message us ahead of time, and then we don't have to just scroll through the Hand-Eye RSS feed. Also, shout out Hand-Eye for taking care of our news every month, and for everyone else too. You should actually subscribe to that newsletter yourself.
Absolutely.
Before we get going, this is a good time to call out our code of conduct, which is in effect at every one of our events, whether they are online or in person. You can check it out on our website, dirty-rectangles.com. While you're there, you can jump on our Discord, dirty-rectangles.com/Discord. If you want to present something on one of these shows, get a hold of us there. Anything else that I'm forgetting off the top? There's the code of conduct right
I don't
there.
think so.
That's it. All right, let's get this ball rolling. We will be back in just a couple minutes with our very first presenter of the night. Am I prepared? Yes, I think so. Okay, here we go. Transition. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show and our very first presenter of the night, Colin Cummings. How's it going, Colin?
I'm good.
Excellent.
How are you?
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm super excited for you to be here and see what is going on here.
Excellent. This is my first Dirty Rectangles presentation, so I've been to a few that have never actually said things. So hello, I'm saying words now. So some of you may know me, some of you may not know me. I've been around. I make my rounds. Once upon a time, I used to do journalism in Toronto. Now I don't. Now I do game development. Funny how life changes like that. So I'm here to tell all of you lovely game dev folks about tabletop games, specifically why you should turn your property into a tabletop game. Specifically, you have ideas. Let's make a tabletop game. I'm going to say tabletop game a lot. Just roll with me. A presentation on the why and how you should make a tabletop game or cardboard or board game or whatever it is from your video game. This is a very professional presentation, just as a heads up. Obviously, we started with Control there. Control is a fantastic game, and I made a tabletop game based off of it. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. So hello. You may wonder, who am I? Well, my name is Colin Cummings. I make tabletop games. You might have heard of them. If you've heard of Dungeons and Dragons, I've played it once. But specifically, I have made Boy Problems, Blackheart, In Case of an Emergency, Tales End, Side B for Boy Problems, and a bunch of other stuff. I also do community and social media management for video games as well with Evolve PR, and I have marketing and branding experience. Basically, I'm very qualified. I know what I'm talking about, or at least I think so. There's one cover. I meant to click these when I was listening to titles, and then I forgot. But look, I made all these games. Okay, moving on. Some wonderful Final Fantasy concept art. So, game developers, you're making a game. A poor decision, really, but we'll work with it. So in the process of making a game, you're going to end up with a ton of ideas. Concept art, gameplay mechanics, marketing materials, world building, narrative design, quest ideas, all that sort of stuff. A lot of it doesn't make it into the game, and a lot of it does make it into the game. But you end up with just tons of stuff in the process of working on things. And I'm here to tell you that you should do stuff that's not video games with that stuff. You should make a tabletop game with that stuff. So what am I getting at here? And does it involve more work? Sadly, yes. But wait, come back. A tabletop game can do all of these things and more. It can save you time, it can provide feedback and new ideas, and you can lock down the good parts of your game design earlier on in the process. That all sounds great. What does that mean? So a tabletop game could be a big part of your marketing plan. With some outside help, it can fit right into your development schedule and build interest ahead of time. So if you're thinking of what you're going to do for your actual marketing plan, a tabletop game can be a huge part of that. It can take off a lot of the thought process of it, especially if you hire a tabletop designer to come in and do it for you. That's just great. That's just, don't have to worry about that anymore. Provide feedback. If you release a tabletop game, especially before your video game comes out during game development, you can get feedback from players from a ton of different aspects about the game. You can even get new ideas, world building, lore, characters, all that sort of stuff. You also get to lock down the good parts. The process can help you feel more confident about the good parts of your game and lets you move on to new ideas and start revising all the time. Nice, sweet, awesome, all great things. The symbols came with the presentation. I was too lazy to change them. So you need more convincing. Fine. Here's Boyfriend Dungeon, a game that I have not made a tabletop game off of, but I think about constantly. Hitbox, call me. So, I'm not going to lie, it's not easy to make a tabletop game. You got to do layouts. You got to open an Adobe product. That's terrible. Think about physical printing. All of this. But think about this. There's no coding. There's no Unity. There's no Unreal. There's no bugs. There's no versioning. There's updating. But you don't need to go through CERT. You don't need to port to consoles. It's all of that is so much easier. You don't have to worry about any of that. You do need to playtest it. Please playtest it. And you could make it in HTML, so there might be some coding. But otherwise, no coding. Almost no coding. That's amazing. I know all you game devs love to complain about coding. I also love to complain about coding, so let's avoid coding as much as possible. So now I have your attention. Here are 3 wonderful examples of games, tabletop games based on video games. So in the top left, we obviously have Hyper Light Drifter. They did a fantastic job in adapting that for tabletop. The developer of that game worked closely with the developers of Hyper Light Drifter, so they had materials, access to assets, and all that sort of stuff. It was a great way to expand on the really super interesting world of Hyper Light Drifter, but also explore different game mechanics that are happening. Because obviously you can't just adapt Hyper Light Drifter directly to tabletop. You have to think about a party. You have to think about different aspects of what that looks like. At the bottom here we have Light, Spencer Campbell's Light. It was designed based off of Destiny. I'm always very jealous of Spencer because I wanted to make a Destiny tabletop game, and then he did it first, and then he took a lot of flack for it, which was not well deserved, but that's a side story. Anyways, Light, another fantastic way of modeling the storytelling and the gameplay of Destiny. The top game, my own, In Case of an Emergency, which is heavily based off Control, as well as SCP Foundation and other fun little things. This obviously does not adapt Control directly, but takes a lot of elements from it and inspiration from it, and spins it in a way so that it makes more sense as a tabletop game. So how do we do it? You hire someone, probably someone's, preferably me. There are many wonderful, that's about to say wonderful. There are so many wonderful tabletop game designers, graphic designers, writers, editors in the tabletop space. Hire them. Please give them money. They are super, super cool, and they can help expand your ideas in ways you never even thought possible. You get an outside perspective. You get help making a tabletop game, but also you just get some multi-talented people on board. Let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Whoa, fancy transition. I forgot I did that. And I didn't do that. The template did it for me. Okay, so you hired somebody. Great, right? You went on Twitter and said, I need a tabletop game designer, and you hired, somebody. There's a lot of us. So now what? Now you follow 6 simple steps. So you got to find the heart. Now, what do I mean by that? What is the core concept that you want the tabletop game to focus on adapting? Is it the gameplay, the narrative, the world building? Is it the choice that happens in the game? You can't just take, something like the Big Con and stick it on tabletop. You can't just take something like how many of the Toronto Indies can I shout out? You can't just take something like Nobody Saves the World and shove it into a tabletop game. All of those games, you have to take the elements that fit and sort of do and see what's going to fit into tabletop the most. Something like the Hyper Light Drifter really focused on the world building and a lot of that aspect. Something like In Case of Emergency, where I adapted Control. That was more adapting the vibe and the whole idea of like a haunted, cursed workplace. That's sort of you just can't stick a video game into a tabletop game. I mean, unless like it's XCOM or something, and then they made their video game based off a tabletop. Anyway, prototyping is a whole other separate thing. But basically, you have to find the focus. Scope. All game developers love the word scope. So polish those gems. You got to take whatever existing assets you have and then polish them for print and print layouts. Because as I mentioned before, one of the things you want to do is reuse a lot of the assets you already had. So you are using concept art, you're using a lot of stuff you might even use in, speaking to Ontario game developers and speaking from experience, helping with Ontario game developers, you have a lot of material for your funding applications. And a lot of that stuff you're basically making a book at that point anyways, just, take a lot of that and turn it into a tabletop book. But you have to make sure it's polished for print and make sure it's like print ready, 300 DPI, all those sorts of fun things. So who is the star? That's the other thing to consider. As I mentioned with the Hyper Light Drifter adaptation, you have to figure out who is going to play your game. Is it going to be solo? Is it a group? Is it going to be run by a GM? How many folks can play it and what does it look like? How long will a session take? Is it going to be a whole campaign? Is it going to be a one-shot? All those sorts of things you have to consider. If you don't know what any of those mean, if you hired a tabletop game designer, they will know all of what that means, and they will help you figure this out. Because you could do a solo journaling game like a 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, or you can do a GM-less game, or you can do... There's a lot of different ways you can sort of think about that. So ring that marketing bell. That's the other thing. A tabletop game will help market your game, both pre- and post-release. But you can't just drop a tabletop game and expect it to do well. You have to research, do ads, all those sorts of fun things. Now, you're saying to yourself, Colin, you said I should do a tabletop game because I don't have to do a marketing plan. That's a lie. Do a marketing plan. Please hire a PR firm or something if you have funding. And if you have OMDC or whatever the funding is, you probably have to hire a PR firm anyways. But anyways, you have to do marketing for your tabletop game as well. You can't just drop it on itch or DriveThruRPG and move on with your life. However, you can wrap it up in any marketing you're doing for your video game, and it is going to be a big part of it. Especially if you're doing it, actually no, even pre or post release, it's a really good thing to build your community off of, because you are either inviting players to look at the world and the characters and what you're developing before the game comes out, or you're inviting them after the game comes out to start building their own stories and building onto the world you've already created. The nice thing about tabletop is it's so collaborative and it's so community based that, you know, with the right inspiration, you can get so much out of your community when you release a tabletop game. Layouts. So time to buy Affinity Designer if you haven't. You thought you were designing a game? Wrong. You are designing a really fancy art book. And fun art book with some rules in it and some dice rolling maybe. That's another question. But you have to, you know, I mean, again, I recommend Affinity over Adobe because Adobe's terrible. But either way, you're using InDesign, you're using Affinity, you're using something to lay out this book and make it print ready. Or even if you aren't going to print it, it still needs to be, you know, PDF or HTML or whatever ready. So who is this for? Going back to the word scope. Are you making it for tabletop game or tabletop players? Are you making it for the existing fans of the game? Is it going to drive game sales, or are you driving tabletop game sales? What platform are you going to put it on? Is it a bonus on your Steam release? Is it going to be released separately on itch.io? These are all the sort of things to consider. Are you going to print it? Are you going to make an actual physical book that you can hold and cherish, which is very nice. I recommend that highly. Once again, I just used the symbols that came with the presentation. Boop, boop, boop. So these steps sound less than simple. You really need to manage your expectations. This is my creator dashboard on itch as of yesterday. It's not bad. Making tabletop games has earned me $14,648 US in revenue. About 1,700 people have bought it, 47,000 downloads. That's not terrible for a tabletop game. If you're wondering how I pay my rent, it's not with that. It's with my day job. However, tabletop has become sort of a fun side thing for me. So I say all this to manage your expectations. If you're going to make a tabletop game and adapt it from your video game property, you're not going to make Wizards of the Coast money. You might do Avatar: The Last Airbender Kickstarter money and make billions or millions of dollars. Or you might do, even Hyper Light Drifter actually did very well for them. Or you might do a moderate success like Lancer or Wanderhome. Those are sort of more indie darlings in the tabletop scene, and you've probably heard of them. But still, you're probably not going to make a tabletop game because you're like hedging your bets just in case your video game doesn't sell well. This is a thing to support your video game and to explore the world that you're building or the gameplay mechanics that you're expanding upon. One of the great things of making a tabletop game is it lets you helps you reuse assets. It expands on your world building, becomes more part of your marketing plan, lets you experiment with gameplay and art. You have something to play while Unreal loads shaders, and it can be scoped wildly. Making a video game, you can do it with 2 people, you can do it with 1 person, but you can also do it with massive teams. And tabletop's a similar way, but you do hit diminishing returns at some point. And the nice thing is that you can just hire one person to make a tabletop game for you. Give them the assets, give them access to your development materials, and they can make a tabletop game for you in a few months, not years. Tabletop game development does not take years; it takes months, maybe a year. Again, but depending on the scale, if you're doing a 300-page book, maybe years. But you can do a 20-page book. You can do a one-shot. You can do something small, do something big, do something medium. All this is sort of available to you. And because it's so flexible, it's another reason why you should make a tabletop game. Neat. Here's a page from my own Boy Problems game, in case you were wondering how weird can I get with my tabletop game. That's how weird you can get. Or even weirder, really. So you have additional questions. I have additional answers. Should I do a Kickstarter? Classic question, especially for tabletop. If you are on Kickstarter, which probably all of you are, and paying attention to it right now, tabletop games just rule Kickstarter. There are articles that tell you they make millions upon billions of dollars, basically. Also, I say all of this as of September 14th, 2021, or September 15th. That could change. But right now, tabletop games do extremely well on Kickstarter. If you do a Kickstarter, it lets you hire and pay your contributors properly. It'll also let you scope properly, and you can even build a tabletop game into your video game Kickstarter. Just combine the two. These are all sort of options that are available to you. If you want to, I make all my games almost entirely by myself, I just fund it off of the previous sales mostly. There are different ways to do it. So should you do a card game or a board game? Some of those formats might fit better than a tabletop actual RPG. Dungeons and Dragons. We use that as the ubiquitous go-to explanation. But yes, you could do something that's different than the D&D style of game. The only thing about card game and board games, especially right now in 2021, is you have to think about printing and shipping costs. It's a lot cheaper to make a book, although it's also really expensive to make a book because paper is really expensive. But other than that, if you try to make a card game or a board game, think of the Dark Souls Kickstarter where you get boxes and boxes of figurines and all these sorts of things. Board games and card games can overscope really easily. Card games are really hard to balance. Look at video game card games. Slay the Spire is super good because it's tuned, to the umpteenth degree. And board games are heavy. They're expensive to produce. If your game fits better into one of those properties, go for it. But just consider that as, something to consider going forward. Now, can you just copy another game? Yes, kind of. What I mean by that is there's a lot of tabletop games that are Creative Commons. So rule sets that let you go in, tweak, hack, modify them to fit whatever you need. So if you're doing a tabletop game based off your video game property and you don't really want to adapt the gameplay mechanics, you're more focused on narrative and story, you can look at existing rule sets that have Creative Commons licensing to them and just hack that instead. Boy Problems is actually built off of Lasers and Feelings, a John Herbert game. I've sort of built on it and expanded upon it that Lasers and Feelings only vaguely exists inside it, but there's a lot of different rule sets that you can adapt your game off of, and that just makes things a lot easier. Here's another game I made. I'm just shoving those all in here. So you stopped paying attention after I said you have ideas, which is very 20 minutes. How long is this going on? A while ago. So too long, didn't pay attention. So you get 2 games for the price of 1. Well, 1 and a bit. Tabletop budgets are a lot lower than video game budgets. You're going to get a lot more. You get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of tabletop budgets. So 2 games for the price of 1 is just an easier way of wording it. You get to reuse assets, expanded ideas, have fun with design, and do a lot of world building. All that's really important to the game you're making. It lets you market your game super easily. It lets you establish a fan base and community and puts a lot of the power in your community's hands in terms of idea creation, character creation, world building, all that sort of fun lore stuff. You can hire tabletop folk or 2 or 12, and they can help design it. And even you can move them onto your video game too. They know game design, they know narrative, they know to write, they know to edit. All that stuff is super helpful to video games as well. Obviously, don't scope too big. You don't want your tabletop game to overshadow your video game. But just scope. And then at the very end, as I mentioned, you get a very pretty book. So you need it simplified more. I can do that. Just take your art book and add dice or something. That's pretty much you're making an art book. You're making an art book with some rules on it. That's if you really want me to reduce it to the bare essentials, that's what you're doing. The end. These are all the games I made. I've listed them multiple times in this presentation. I am also Colin M. Cummings on Twitter. I can do all sorts of stuff if you need me to do them. Various links, various socials are all there. Yeah, that's about it. That's all I got, unless someone has questions.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, this is awesome. So
Thank you, Colin.
yeah, thank you. Did anybody? Sorry, I jumped in with a question immediately. Did someone else already have one in the organizers?
Go ahead.
Cool, thank you. So, this is really, really cool. I also love like the aesthetic of all these pieces that you have up here. Like, very, very cool stuff. I'm wondering. So let's say I'm a budding indie game developer, and I got this cool game. We'll call it Light Hyper something, and I want to
Yeah.
I want to turn it into a board game, and I approach somebody like you, right? And let's just say maybe from your perspective, you don't have any experience with this game. Like, what steps do you take to start tackling something like this to get your impressions on where you think this like a property could go as a tabletop game?
Good
What are your
question.
steps?
Yeah, so it's because especially you're coming as a game developer, the way you look at a game is going to be a lot different than the way somebody else, especially a tabletop developer, looks at your game. I look at Control is a great example. I looked at like a lot of people might look at Control and think like, oh, there's the shooting and the really good story and all that stuff is really important to it. I'm probably actually the majority for this. I played Control and I was like, I want to read every document. I love of the way all the levels look. I love all the world building. I love the setting. I love all that sort of stuff. So for that when I was doing Case of Emergency, that was one of the main things I looked at was like, what makes Control, what feelings does it evoke, and what can I do to evoke those feelings in a tabletop game? Because I don't have graphics. I have 2D images, but that's it. I don't have fancy lighting and shadows and art and moving things. Things don't move unless you did a flip book, which is maybe I'll do a flip book, but that's a different question. But basically, yeah, there's a lot to consider. You don't have graphics. You do have art, but you don't have graphics. And so that's one of the things to look at is what if you're coming to me with an indie game that you want adapting. One of the first things I look at is, what feelings does it evoke? What stories does it tell? Because that's what really tabletop is about. It's the stories that we tell ourselves and tell to each other. So because another great example of a game is like The Last of Us. That's a very linear. They had a story they wanted to tell. You cannot adapt that for tabletop because you can't tell the same story over and over and over again. That you can't. That's just not how it works. And you can't force your players into following a story. So you take the pieces of that make sense. Like what made The Last of Us compelling? Okay, it's the setting. It's the post-apocalyptic world. It's the disease that has turned all these people into mushroom people. It's those little elements. It's the survival element. It's the what makes humans human. It's all those sort of feelings. It's very feeling based. It's very all those sort of stuff. That's what you want. That's what you want to pull out from the game. Because I'm not gonna be like, oh, well, I need to adapt the shooting to a tabletop game. I'll figure out how to roll some dice to make a gun feel good. That's part of it, but you want to start at, and it might not even have combat in a tabletop game. That combat doesn't have to exist necessarily.
Yeah.
You really want to focus on, the bits that it's a great. I always think about Austin Walker, who is a fantastic storyteller. If you haven't listened to Friends at the Table or any of his podcasts, they're amazing. But one of the things that I love when he's on Waypoint or when he's on when he was on Giant Bomb is he had these stories to tell about video games. He wasn't just like, I played a game, it was great, blah blah blah. It was always like, okay, so I was here and I was like, we were down on my luck and I was almost out of resources, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it's those sorts of stories that you want to pull out and put into your tabletop game, because that's exactly what a tabletop game is. It's just it's storytelling. It's collaborative storytelling.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like with board games, like obviously they're games just like video games are, so they're trying to do the same sort of thing, just using different a different level of technology, I guess. But just using dice and cards to sort of introduce that sort of dynamic unexpectedness that we sort of expect from something like a video game, even. Or something, like when people play sports, you're sort of relying on the fact that you're playing it with other people to give you that kind of that experience. But yeah, it's neat with board games. Like, it's so hard. Like, I feel like it's it goes through periods where they're very popular, but like there's not like a huge amount of money in them, so it's difficult to create like super unique presentations the way that I feel like in video games it's easier to achieve, because you don't have to like manufacture it physically and then send it out to like 1,000 people. You know what I mean? You just make the game once, make all the content once, and that's it. So that definitely allows you to do very fancy stuff in video games with graphics and stuff like that, where to replicate that in board games, you would need to come up with like, what is my board gonna be like that's gonna be like super different than other games, or like like how am I going to create an atmosphere around this thing using pieces that are sort of like fresh or unexpected or whatever, you know what I mean? Like a new fancy way of doing it.
For sure. Yeah, they so I mentioned XCOM as a great example. Like a lot of what Firaxis does is they all their gameplay comes from tabletop first. They do all their prototyping with tabletop. And if you're doing a very mechanics heavy game, like another great example is like, let's say I wanted to adapt Into the Breach. Into the Breach has a very interesting story to it, has some interesting world building, but it's not. There's very little to pull from for tabletop. At some point, you're like, I'm not really adapting Into the Breach. You have to kind of call it something else. If I was making a role playing game, but if I'm making a board game, something like Into the Breach fits in perfectly. That's Into the Breach is something that you can definitely imagine with miniatures and dice and a deck to draw from. That adapts super easily into a board game. So it's all depending on sort of what game. If you are thinking about doing a tabletop game, what your game fits into. It's a great thing. It's also a great thing because it lets you look at your own game through a different lens. Especially if you're doing a board game, your gameplay mechanics. Because one of the things about games is that they have to feel a certain way. We talk about game feel a lot, and it's like this magical, like, it's the slowdown when you have a huge hit. It's the way Dark Souls feels. It's the way why everyone loves Destiny as a shooter. It feels good. And you can't translate that to a board game. Like you don't have good feel in a board game. It's very difficult. But instead, you can't just cover your gameplay mechanics with how it feels. You have to instead imagine the balance. You have to imagine how it frames the narrative around the board game and the group you're with. And it has to have. You have to think of your gameplay mechanics in terms of an arc of a build up, a crescendo, and either failure or success. And that's really difficult to do when you have to abstract it to a board or to cards instead of into a video game.
Super.
Boop, boop, boop.
Colin, this has been awesome. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for showing off all your things here. Let's get some Doritos in the chat for Colin.
Doritos in the chat for Colin.
Everybody go follow him on Twitter. Everyone hire him to make your board games. Go buy his games, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, Colin. This was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, we will be back in just a minute with our next presenter. Don't go anywhere. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our very next presenter of the evening, Tabby Rose. What's going on, Tabby?
Not much. How are you tonight?
I am very excited and I love these colors, so feel free to take it away.
I love them too. All right. So tonight, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about the Big Con, which actually has come up like a couple of times tonight. So that's kind of fun. So I'm going to be talking about accessibility, which is I don't know, maybe not everyone's favorite topic, but it's my favorite topic. So you have to listen to me for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And
We're
hopefully it
trying.
goes well. If you don't know me, I'm Tabby Rose, and I'm the UX and UI director at Mighty L. And my background was actually not originally in games. So part of what I want to talk to you tonight about is how that like shapes the way that I look at games and game design. So my background's actually in biology and medical illustration, which is culminated in a master's degree in biomedical communication, which nobody knows what that is. So it's fine. It's a very technical version of medical illustration, basically, that involves a lot of technology. Although today's talk is definitely about UX and games, I like to think my approach is a little bit based in my former science education life as well. And this picture of me is actually from our 90s themed barbecue that we recently had to launch the game, in which we all got fanny packs with fun stuff in them, and I'm very excited about it. So the Big Con is Mighty L's debut game. We just launched on August 31st, so we are still very much basking in our post-launch glory of taking support requests from people, I guess. And the Big Con is, if you haven't heard of it, it's a 90s comedy adventure game about Allie, who's a teen whose mom's video store is under threat from loan sharks. So Allie decides to ditch Bandcamp, go on a cross-country adventure, and con people out of their money. So it is a game about being a con artist. It was a blast to work on, and I'm super proud that it's out now. This was actually my first role as a UX and UI designer. Previously to this, I was the creative director of my own company. We had another game that came out a couple of years ago, but I didn't have like a direct UX role on it. We actually had someone else for that. So I wanted to do a little bit of a postmortem and talk about my process in helping bring our game to life. And specifically, I wanted to talk about my work in making the Big Con accessible in the hopes that it inspires some of you out there to make your games more accessible too. All right, so let's talk about some of the actual accessibility features in the Big Con. So when I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about like the options menu in the game, although all options are accessibility options. I mean that the entire UI and UX is designed with the player in mind, and knowing that we want as many people as possible to be able to play like out of the gate without having to change very much. So that means that there are built-in accessibility features, which I like to call design, as well as options, and also communication outside the game itself to facilitate an enjoyable experience for players. So in terms of some of our built-in features, we use large font size and high text contrast to help make dialogue easier to read from farther away or with low vision. All of our dialogue in UI was contrast tested to make sure that it passes WCAG guidelines, which is it's a guideline meant for web accessibility, but it works perfectly well for games as well. I've linked to that at the end of the presentation, and if anybody wants these slides later, just let me know. But they're pretty easy to find. It's by WebAIM, does a good version of this. We use really large interaction regions for things like pickpocketing, eavesdropping, and picking up items to make it easier to move around the world and do stuff in it, even if you don't change any of the other difficulty options. Information is usually communicated through multiple channels, so we use icons, color, and movement as opposed to color alone. We don't have voice acting in the game, but none of the audio in the game is required to hear to play, although it is used to enhance the experience and like help you understand, like when you might be in danger and that sort of thing. But nothing is like conferred through audio alone. So if you are hard of hearing, that shouldn't stop you from being able to play. And we always show what buttons need to be used for different actions in the UI so that players don't need to remember that kind of information. And then there are features which are optional, meaning players can either choose whether to take advantage of them or they can be directly altered in the options menu. So one of the big things we did is we implemented a one-button difficulty option for pickpocketing, which is one of the major mechanics in the game. Since the regular version of that minigame requires a long button press and precise timing, which is not always easy or possible for someone to do if they have a motor disability. So holding a button for a really long time and choosing when to release it, that can be an issue. So we made it so that entire minigame is abstracted away to one button if need be. Of course, this also makes pickpocketing easy for many other reasons, like needing to review the game quickly, or testing, or speedrunning, or getting bored of the mechanic, or having wrist strain, any of those things. There's always multiple reasons to have these kinds of options, which is part of why we use them. There are story hints and tutorials given via our very popular NPC Radghost, who's extremely cool. But you can also ignore them if you want to figure things out on your own. And we use a notebook to automatically store facts and objectives for various cons and let you know when the objectives have been reached. So this was actually the first feature I designed for the game, and it's one of the most important for actually understanding what you're doing. And this allows you to, like, if you've left a play session and you come back some days later and you don't remember exactly what you were doing, this should be able to jog your memory for that. And then in the options, you can also turn off the dialogue effect, so that background, like, sprinkle effect in the conversation scenes, it moves during gameplay, and some people find that distracting, so we allowed for a couple of options to either make it static or turn off the noise entirely, so it's just a color. You can change the font. So there's a screenshot here of the game as played in Open Dyslexic, which is one of the fonts that we provide for people if you find the default fonts difficult to read. And then finally, it's my strong belief that accessibility doesn't just stop at the game itself. So players won't know that the options exist in the game unless we tell them somehow. And for some people, that makes the difference between buying the game or not, right? People don't want to have to try and return. They would like to know what is in the game beforehand. And if you are a disabled player who, these kinds of things can really make the difference between whether or not you have, like, a good time playing, then it's important to communicate this somewhere else in your marketing, basically. So for that reason, we made accessibility part of our PR and marketing plan, which is part of why I'm here tonight talking about this, obviously. And I also spent some time making a fully accessible version of our website, which lists all of the accessibility features. Count how many times I say accessibility. As well as all the other information about the game. So the website was made to work with keyboard only and screen readers to facilitate getting our game information easily for anyone who doesn't want to sift through our very cool but very inaccessible 90s style landing page. And our marketing team has also been making an effort to build accessibility into all of our communication. So we've started captioning our trailers and our other video content. We are adding alternative text to images on social media and more. And I believe you should do so too. It actually doesn't take that long, especially for a trailer that doesn't have, like, a lot of talking in it. It really doesn't take a very long time. So that's a review of what's in the game. I now want to talk a little bit about how I approach design in order to actually build those features. And hopefully this has some nuggets of truth that you can use as well. If you've ever been my student, and I don't know if there are students of mine in this room, it's possible. You've probably seen me show this slide. I put it in, like, all of my classes. But this is how I think about game systems as a UX and UI designer. So games always exist as a conversation between a player and a game program. Players provide inputs or controls which change something within the game. And then that presents some kind of feedback, which changes something within the player, and that prompts them to choose a new input, and so on. So UX and accessibility exist in the input and output phases. Like, that's where my brain lives. So how do we make controls as seamless as possible so that any player can play? And how do we make feedback as understandable as possible so that any player can interpret it, or whatever, as wide a range as possible? So in the loop I just showed, players are integral parts of that system that we create. A game literally doesn't exist without a player on the other end. So therefore, a UX designer, and I would also consider myself a game designer by extension, my most important skills are empathy and communication. That's so that I can design controls that players can use, and I can design feedback that they can understand. And for me, this is where my background comes into play. So, like I said, I studied scientific communication, basically how to use images, words, and layouts to explain difficult concepts to different kinds of audiences. It's so important to know who you're speaking to so that you can design that communication effectively. And so basically, I consider myself a teacher or communicator in almost all things I do. When I'm making games, that means that my main job is to teach players what the mechanics are and how they can use their verbs or controls effectively. And as a teacher, I want to remove their barriers to learning. So in that case, that means being able to finish the game. And I want to scaffold their learning so that they feel like that they pulled off the game themselves. They pulled off the big con, right? And the game didn't get in their way of having fun. If you haven't read much about the psychology of like sensation and perception as it relates to design, I highly recommend looking at a couple of topics that I've listed here. So Gestalt principles of design, the science of visual processing especially are good places to start. And I did include a primer video in the notes at the end of these slides if anybody wants them. But basically, the way we sense the world with our bodies, the way our brains perceive that input, those are different systems. And a good designer knows a little bit about both, a little bit how to manipulate both, and also how to accommodate for both, right? So I want to take a range of abilities into account when designing for accessibility, which might mean going back to basics. For example, a colorblind player might have trouble discerning different colored icons, right? But science tells me that all humans are, in general, better at distinguishing movement and luminance or contrast rather than color. So maybe my initial design uses those aspects, movement and luminance, for crucial information to start with. And color is something that's only used in an aesthetic way. That way, I'm taking colorblind players into account, but I'm also designing for the majority of players. I'm designing for better like human interaction, right? And I should say that that's where like the built-in accessibility part comes from. Like not the options that we provide, but that's just the stuff that makes for good design in a game. And then I design for player needs. So if it can't be built in because of technical or artistic constraints, then it's time to make an option. So for example, we had a specific look and feel for the fonts that we used in the games that they would reflect the art direction, the purpose, our theme, like our, comedic nature and that sort of thing. We wanted handwritten font for our notebook so that it would look like Allie was writing in her notebook, for example. But that means that we're sacrificing some degree of readability for like art. And if that means that someone might simply not be able to play with that default in place, then I want to provide an option that empowers them to choose the experience that allows them like the least friction. If that means sacrificing a little art for access, then that's the thing that we do, right? And so therefore we have font options. So keep in mind that tutorials, especially optional ones, also give players choices about how much information they get at a given time. I would add that making space to explain what your options do in-game is also an example of this, and that you should do it. You should describe what your options do when you turn them off or on, preferably with images if you can, or like, little videos and that sort of thing. My advice is to use really plain and simple language when crafting these explanations. In part because you want to account for people who may have, like cognitive disabilities that mean that processing information is really difficult. And then, of course, test your options with a range of audience members, including players with disabilities. Listen to their feedback, adjust within your ability to do so. I'll give you a little peek at my own process just for a couple of minutes. So I started with some really early paper prototyping. And like Colin said earlier, like this is super quick, easy, cheap, dirty. I know you all know this as game designers, but it's still like good to remind ourselves, I think. I always think this is like such an extraneous step when I'm trying to design a game, but then when I do it, I'm like so happy that I did it. So my first task was to redesign that notebook feature that I showed you earlier. And early demos before I came on the project were showing that players didn't use this feature to keep track of their like cons, or they didn't know how to use it. So I was asked to come in and like make it usable and make people want to use it. Dave says it was a mess. I don't think it was a mess, but it wasn't designed by a UX designer. That's fine. So I just did this part with my friends and neighbors. You don't have to do paper prototyping with like an actual like audience group necessarily. It just has to be whatever quickest, easiest way you can do it. Since I just wanted some quick feedback and information. So while playing the demo with them, I basically taped off part of the screen. I just showed the notebook icon. I gave players a paper notebook, and whenever they got a piece of information that would go into the notebook, I gave them a physical sticky note and asked them to organize the information however felt appropriate to them. I actually have that notebook here. I decorated it. And yeah, so these were like all the sticky notes that we gave to people. This is probably really tiny on screen. And then I just like had their note and for their name, and then I had how they organized things. I had this for like 6 different players, and then I think at the end of this I had interviews from everybody as well, like post-play interviews just about what they liked and didn't like and some usability stuff in general. once that was accepted by the team, once like we had processed the data and like kind of done some more research on notebooks and seen what other games were doing and all that, then I used the data in the notebook experiment to begin mocking up the UI in Adobe XD, the dreaded Adobe. I could have used something else, but it was easy. So that the team could just like play through parts of the UI flow, including the notebook, main menu, options panels, all of that. And we could kind of get an idea of like what the user flow of that was going to look like. At the same time, I also did accessibility research. So I used the game accessibility guidelines to make a big list of accessibility considerations and prioritized an annotated list based on basically risk reward for our time and budget. So you can see some of my notes here. I was saying like, use simple, clear language, cognitive. Attempting this in options needs playtest review. Consider adding clarity for tutorials, e.g. pickpocketing, which we now have like images for. Solicit accessibility feedback, include some people with impairments amongst playtesting participants. This is like wording from the accessibility guidelines. I said, we can definitely plan this for playtesting, and I've already had some limited feedback, etc. So I presented this plan to the team. We decided what would be prioritized, what would be possible for us to do in the time that we had, and basically made tasks out of it. Once we had a working design in game, we contacted Able Gamers, who are, if you haven't heard of them, they're a charity for disabled gamers. And they help us set up a player panel. So they have a service where disabled players can sign up as playtesters, be matched with studios looking to get their feedback on games. We went through like a narrowing down process with them and eventually selected 9 participants and paid them to play the demo. And that's important. Please pay people who help you with the game. We recorded their playthrough, we made notes throughout, conducted interviews with each person to get a sense of what was working and what wasn't, and that included basic gameplay as well as accessibility options that we had in place at the time. And I won't show what any of the feedback looked like because I would like to just protect their confidentiality in that, but it was a wealth of information. It was very helpful to us. And then finally, based on their feedback, we came up with a new development plan, adjusted as much as we could before launch, and we are still adjusting some things. So post-launch, we're still talking to players with disabilities who have questions about whether they'll be able to play, who want to stream, or who want to help out in some way. We wouldn't even be able to do this if we weren't making an effort to let our players know that we care about accessibility and that there are options for them in game. So like I showed before, we're working on making our marketing itself more accessible so that more potential players can hear about us. And that also means we're trying to push for things like getting our publisher to include captions on our trailers or cultivate, our Discord community, make sure that they care about accessibility as well. Like just sort of like, talk about it a lot so that people care about it. And lest it go without being said, a big part of my job has been advocating for accessibility with my team, who are, I can see in chat, who are very excited about accessibility now, and probably were before, but I think know more about it now, and getting them on board, which they absolutely have been. So it really takes the whole team buying in for this to work. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to get the resources and help that you need. And we're also still making changes. So there were some features that had to be cut. We have like complete control remapping in the game had to be cut before we launched, and now we're doing our best to add it back in bigger and better than ever. So a couple of takeaways. Accessibility is a process. It's okay. You're going to be constantly researching, learning, talking to people, and trying new things. Look at other design disciplines. The web development world has been having this conversation for a really long time, and there are a lot of great resources out there. Look at education, infographic design, regular old graphic design. Those are all going to be helpful to you, as well as the psychology stuff. Remember that the best people to ask about making your game more accessible are the people who need barriers removed, and please compensate them for their time and work. Accessibility is in some ways about compromise and doing the best you can with your available resources. That's not an excuse to wait till the last minute and run out of time and budget for this work. It should be incorporated into your game and your UX process as early as possible, with some understanding that you may not have control over a project as early as you might like. If you get buy-in from the whole team, then the work is easier and you can go deeper. Communicate your limitations as well as your features to players. Not every game is for everyone, and that's okay. You're helping players make informed like buying decisions basically without having to buy and potentially return your game, which is a pain in the ass for everybody involved. And to find games that they'll enjoy. You won't get everything perfectly right the first time. That's okay. Just bring your knowledge to your future projects. All right, so that's it for me. Thanks so much for your time. You can follow me online at Tabby Rose, and the Big Con and our future work can be found at MightyL. If you want these slides, I will provide a link in the chat, and you can feel free to DM me, and I'll send them to you as well. I'm giving another presentation next month, so I'm going to save them for being publicly online till then. But yeah, let me know if this has been helpful to you, and let me know if you have any questions. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Tabby.
Thank you,
Yeah, wonderful.
Tabby.
Hey, Doritos in the chat for Tabby.
I'm
Doritos
gonna,
for Tabby.
gonna save these
Yeah,
slides.
Everyone take a
Save the
screenshot.
slides. Take a screenshot if you want those links, or I'll send them to you.
This is so cool. I teach web development, so I'm all about this accessibility stuff, and I love seeing the shift that's been happening in games. Not even just indie games, but also AAA games taking this way more seriously in the past 5 years or so, right? And
Definitely.
just huge kudos and call outs for you guys for like doubling down on this stuff. It's such an important thing, and see you guys taking it so seriously and coming away with like really strong ideas because of it is cool.
I appreciate that. I think, yeah, I also started in web. I did web development after I graduated for quite a while, and I also taught it for a little while. And it's like such a big conversation there. Like, because there are laws that have come into effect in the US and are about to come into effect in Ontario, I think the conversation has had to change in the past couple of years for the better, way for the better. And it means that there's all these guidelines and stuff in place already that you can like take advantage of, which is awesome. I feel like I'm not doing anything groundbreaking. I'm just reading and doing my best. but I think there's still enough people out there who like aren't aware of the conversation yet that it's still worth having.
It's like you said, there's always something new to learn as well, right? So there's for those that feel like there's too much to jump into or whatever, it's like you need to start taking those little steps and examine your games and see those small things that you can do to create those opportunities for accessibility, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like you said, you're constantly learning. You're always learning new things that you can do, that you can change, that you can adapt into. Yeah, super interesting. Anybody else in the room here have a question for Tabby?
No questions, but I loved hearing about how like your background in science communication like affects how you see these things and like is something that you draw on.
Yeah. So when I went through BMC, I was studying like educational games. Like so we basically have two streams in the biomedical communication world. We either do 3D animation, and you do like mostly animations for pharmaceuticals and like medical processes and stuff like that. Like it's like anatomical or process related. Or you do the interactive stream, which is what I was in, where we learn like infographics and web design and like educational apps, and in my case, educational games. So I was always really interested in like educational game design, and I did a lot of research on how to teach things in games. And from that, I think I really kind of took to heart that all game design is teaching. And communication. And I think that like, I know that's not totally about accessibility, but it was like such a foundational part of how I learned design in general that like I can't separate my work from that anymore.
So cool. Tabby,
Yeah.
thank you so much for this presentation. This was amazing. Everyone go
Thanks for
follow
having me.
Tabby. Let's get some more Doritos in the chat for Tabby. Thank you so much. We will be back with our next presenter. Don't go anywhere. Here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our next presenter of the night, substituting for Jeremy Penner, the one and only Jamal Aberley. What's going on, Jamal?
Hi, thanks for having me. Kind of a last-minute decision for me to do this, but I think it's something fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to have see what you're working on here. It's been a while since you've come out to Rectangles, right? You were
Yeah,
out in
so
person.
yeah, I used to go in person. Actually, I was getting back into it before COVID, and then COVID happened. A bunch of life stuff changed, and I got lucky enough to actually start pursuing the indie dream. I have a supporting wife who's cool with this idea, so I'm about to. I pretty much did a bunch of rapid prototypes, had some problems. Now I'm on a game that I plan on taking to completion, and that's what I'm going to show my little alpha build, kind of.
Cool. Let's see.
Okay, so let's get started here. So this game is Rogue Light. It's heroes get remembered, but legends never die. Right now, I just pretty much have my basic scene. This is your world map where you have your heroes will travel to different places. They can go into their guild hall, and in here, I just have placeholder stuff. So pretty much your guild hall is separated into a couple different things. You have Hall of Heroes. So whenever your heroes die, because it's a rogue light, you will keep persistent items. So if a hero goes on a quest and gets a really cool sword and then they die, they will be venerated and put in the Hall of Heroes, and the sword will either be left at the last place they died or possibly got retrieved and back to your armory. You have the Tower of Legends. The idea is that eventually heroes will get to the point where they can retire, and when they retire, they become a legend, and they can pass on a skill that they would have learned along their way to some new hero. Your quest board. This is my janky little quest board right now. Pretty much you choose a quest. It sets a marker in the world map, and you pretty much travel to that marker. Go back here. We'll go back to our world map. So right now, you can travel to different little nodes. So it's going to be a node-based travel system that's generated the first instance of a new game. From that point on, every time you get new heroes, the game world won't change, but it'll stay persistent with that first seeding of the nodes. But then if, let's say, you started a flat, completely new game, there wouldn't be any of your stuff from before. So you could travel to the rock. We could travel to a little village here. My wife likes to point out that the horse doesn't rotate in the direction that they're traveling right now, but you can enter the village. In here, you'll find things like shops, the tavern, which will provide sub-quests. So these are not quests you have to do, but they're quests that affect the persistent nature of the world. So let's say you go to a tavern, they tell you, hey, there's a goblin nest nearby. Would you mind getting rid of it? And then you choose, you know what? I'm just going to go on, my quest. I'm not going to worry about that goblin nest. Certain events like that will have timers. And because the world is persistent and carries on over a certain amount of time, those goblins could maybe attack the village. And then you come back from your quest and you find the village is burnt down. So this is all future stuff. Right now, I'm going to show you a little bit of the combat system I got. So it's kind of similar to how, kind of like Pokemon, actually. It's where I kind of started when I started doing this, is where I kind of started off. Pretty much you're going to have the rock, paper, scissors of attacks. So D&D style, where you have bludgeoning, stabbing, and piercing. I have a basic thing. The reason my guy is red is because he is my test character right now. And my test character does unlimited damage because I just needed to get through some of the fights. We'll travel to more rocks and we'll go in here. So here's another one. This one actually has my blocking out code for not letting you pick something. So we can fight a little level 0 wyvern. He'll shock us back. I can heal. I'll implement some sort of particle or something to show off healing. We can stab. Poocha! And then I will let him kill me. So actually, I think I'll beat him with this. There we go. And I die. And it just brings you back to the main title card. So that's pretty much the gist of what I have developed so far. I could talk a lot about all the different other things that are implemented or that will be implemented, but this is literally all I want to show because this is what I have working. So big goal is I'm going to do my business funding, pretty much getting a business loan in the next month or so, and then I'll have a 1 year of development. This is a solo project. The scope is meant to be within 1 year of development and completion. I'm pretty much doing everything depending on where situations go. I might get some assistance with art, but everything's done with me. I'm doing everything in Unity. I practice pixel art regularly. I use a site called Pixel Art, and I do their daily challenge. So my tag is Dark Auberly. I also have a dev vlog where I'm kind of doing this. It's more for me to like keep track of what I've been doing over this course of my adventure. But if you want to go and look at me talk awkwardly into a camera and put stuff floating in the air explaining my ideas, there's that. I turned off Twitch, so I have no idea if anyone's writing anything in Twitch chat. But yeah, if anyone has questions, comments.
Mostly people appreciating your art style.
Oh, thank you. Actually, that main sprite that was fighting, that was actually from a friend of mine. He lent it. He was like, "You can have this art because you make things nicer when you're first prototyping." But everything else is actually me learning how to do pixel art. So some stuff is janky, some stuff is cleaner. Depends on how much time I'm spending. I'm learning quite a bit, actually. So it's pretty nice. And it's a lot faster than 3D modeling. So I don't know what else to say. Hi, awesome. Anna, if you're watching.
We got some call. I love the aesthetic of. Can you go back into the game again when you go into one of the towns?
Yeah, so the town is super basic because that's actually literally it was one of my challenges on the daily challenge for the pixel art. So this town was literally a piece of pixel art that started off, and to get the skills I need to actually make the art quite good. I work in a 32 by 32 pixel size.
Cool.
So this is slightly larger. But yeah, all my art's going to kind of stay in that realm. One, for simplicity's sake, but two, it actually helps for really pulling definition out for character models. So each character, I don't want it to be overly complicated. I want you to be able to tell, hey, that guy's big, strong brute, or that's a wizard because they got a big hat. So you pick, 3 key features, you highlight those, and you go from there. I'm using just the basic buttons right now, but eventually this one's probably going to get a better closer because this is literally the exact same picture as this. I'll actually have a much cleaner, probably 100 by 100 or something bigger pixel rate in the city. And yeah, that's, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to see while it's here.
How long you been putting this together now for now?
So this project, it got snowballed quite quickly. It's only been a couple weeks. I was working on a different project before that, which I'd been working on for months, and pretty much I hit a wall, and I couldn't get past the little block. It was just a level design thing. But yeah, I plan on using these kind of little icons. The dragon's going to be a lot bigger for the actual final piece of art, but there's going to be icons in the world map. So pretty much wherever you start at your home base, your guild hall, and on the side, you'll have the icon of wherever your quest is. So it's not going to be as straightforward as going left and right. You'll be able to go in all sorts of different directions. I haven't actually spaced my sprites out far enough, but your carriage can only travel a certain distance. So you actually do have to travel from node to node to get to different places. Right now, all the nodes are set to like a triggered event, so you can enter the area. But some of the combat nodes will definitely just it'll trigger on its own. So as you pass to that node, the second you go in it, you get ambushed by goblins or skeletons or whatever.
It's got a very Might and Magic kind of feel to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved Might and Magic, so thanks for the compliment.
Immediately what comes to mind. This is awesome, dude.
Yeah, so this is hopefully next thing that I'm getting done is for the next time I maybe present, who knows, is that I want to get my quest system up and running. So it actually tells you to go to a specific location, a specific node. The leveling system. So as they fight, your guys gain levels. And then just like Pokemon, as they level up, they can choose to learn a different moveset. And then, so those are the 2 big ones I want to implement in the next coming weeks. Then after that, probably like a stats card for each character that I want to develop. Awesome. And have a nice big GDD full of so much stuff. And just like Eric had mentioned, sometimes you create tons and tons of stuff and it will never get implemented.
Yeah. That's awesome. Jamal, thank you so much for showing this. This is super, super cool. Let's get some Doritos in the chat for Jamal. Everyone go find him on Twitter. Support his game. Throw some high fives, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, Jamal. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we will be back in just a second with our final presenter of the evening. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our final presenter of the evening, the one, the only, Jeremy Penner. What's going on, Jeremy?
Hey, not much. Just been, well, maybe a little. So I'm going to talk about the thing that I've been working on for about the past month, which is that I wrote a compiler, and I'm making a game with the compiler that I wrote. If you haven't seen me before, over the past couple of years, I've been really heavily into developing new games for old systems and building my own tools for that. And so I built a couple games for the Apple II. The platform that I'm targeting now is kind of the next evolution of the last evolution of the Apple II before that whole evolutionary line died out. It's called the Apple II GS. And it's a strange little machine. The Apple II ran on a 6502 processor. The Apple II GS uses and that's an 8-bit machine. Apple II GS runs on the 65816 processor, which is a 16-bit processor, which is backwards compatible with the 6502. As far as I know, the machines that ran this are the Apple II GS and the Super Nintendo use this chip. So it's actually backwards compatible with all Apple II software, but you can run at a faster clock rate and run newer, fancier software. So I decided I wanted to write some of this newer, fancier software, and because I had a more powerful processor and a lot more memory and more resources to work with, although not necessarily as much as you might think, I decided, okay, well, instead of writing, this space-constrained fourth, you might remember from my previous, stuff showing you code that's like this weird mix of assembly, and Lisp and Forth all kind of tangled together. I thought, I'm going to write something that, people in 2021 recognize as code. So I wrote a single-pass compiler. It is called the Sufficiently Simple Compiler. It is less than 500 lines of code, top to bottom, which is kind of where I want to keep it. And basically, it has 2 data types. It has the 16-bit number and the 32-bit number. Most things assume it's unsigned. Some signed stuff might work. I haven't really. I don't know. We'll see. This is literally an entire compiler that compiles to machine code, 65816 machine code. Kind of a C-like language. So and you can kind of see here's a function called wait for key, and it calls this ROM routine called flush events, and then here's a while loop that says, well, get next event, and we load it into this event buffer. While that doesn't return true, then we just keep yielding. So I actually have implemented cooperative multitasking already at this point. That's part of the compiler. That is, well, it's an add-on to the compiler. It's a module. It's a library. This is less than 60 lines of code. It's basically just storing the stack pointer and what's called the direct page register. So basically all I'm using that for right now is having a task that just sits there and wait for someone to press a key, and then there's another task that draws some tiles to the screen. So let me show you something that doesn't, without so many parentheses, because nobody actually wants to read code at 9:45 on a Wednesday.
I'm a sicko.
Yes. So this is my tile editor, which has been kind of expanded from the Apple II tile editor. It's basically the same code base. I can actually show. This is all the custom. I kind of factored stuff out. So this is the Apple II GS specific code for the tile editor. Everything else is the same.
Which language is this written in?
So I've written everything in Fennel, which is basically more or less an alternative syntax for Lua that's Lispy. It also adds macros, so you can which I actually use pretty heavily, and it removes some of the uglier pain points of the language, like you can't accidentally define a global just by forgetting to write the word local. And I really love working in Fennel. I've been doing nothing but Fennel for my side projects in the last year, and it's wonderful.
It's a good name.
Yeah. So you can see these tiles are not, they're 16 by 16 pixels, but they are not square. I'm experimenting with potentially isometric art because, well, so here's where things here's another compiler, I guess. So here's a fun story about the Apple IIgs. The graphics architecture on the 2GS for this it has like 320 by 200 pixel, 16 color frame buffer. So you have some control over the palette. This palette I stole from, Real Pixel Artist. There's lots of people out there who are like, hey, check out this flexible pixel art palette that you can do lots of things in, and we'll share them online for free. And so this is what is this? Tile edit 2GS, no, tile draw 2GS. Yeah, so this is DB16. And just literally this guy posted it in a forum post on Pixel Joint. And it looks great. So I don't have to use the EGA palette that I used in New Tower. But anyway, digressing. The problem is, because of the weird backwards compatibility issues, when you're writing to video RAM, the processor actually has to slow down to 1 megahertz in order to do this. And so it is literally impossible to get update the entire screen at 60 frames per second, or even close. You're getting 1/6 of the screen update maximum per refresh. So any kind of graphical thing that you're trying to do on the Apple IIgs is unbearable, because there's no hardware sprites, or there's no kind of acceleration of any kind built in. Even MS-DOS on the EGA, there were a lot of kind of fun tricks you could do where it's if everything is aligned on the 8th pixel or whatever, you can do this fancy thing to speed things up. No, you are just slow. So the kind of insane conventional wisdom for drawing quickly to the Apple IIgs is that, first of all graphics get compiled into code. So 2GS graphics. So here's a sprite compiler that I wrote that outputs 65.816 assembly language. And the other kind of insane thing that has to happen, here's my draw object, which literally calls one of these special functions, which writes bytes to memory in the fastest possible way, because the fastest possible way turns out to be to move the stack pointer to point to video memory and then start pushing things onto the stack, because there's lots of powerful stack pushing instructions. So you have to draw everything backwards, because the stack grows downwards in memory. So you have to jump to the end and start pushing constants backwards onto the stack. And obviously you can't make function calls, because then that pushes the return address onto the stack, and then that's you're literally drawing your function call in on the screen, and so everything has to happen straight through. It's just and of course you have to disable interrupts while you're doing this, because the Apple IIgs has interrupts, and so if some code happens to start running, and then it's going to assume it can use the stack. You can't use the stack. I'm using that to draw. So yeah, you can see literally every line of this. You can see literally every line is heavily commented. And there's this excuse me, especially weird thing that you do to there's an efficient and I won't get into the truly gory details of the Apple IIgs graphics, but suffice to say, it's nuts. But yeah, so I can show you what the code for drawing. So it turns out, if you don't draw, if this pixel is transparent, these, or 4 pixels. Oh shit. If you have 4 pixels in a row that are transparent, there's literally just no code for it. That is free. Drawing a tile with transparency or without is almost equivalent, right? There's no... And so I'm oh, well, I don't have to do, a solid block. There's no advantage to having, you know, these solid tiles and having sprites be separate. I could just, you know, I have one thing that just compiles it into the, you know, reasonably, it's not quite the tightest possible code. I could make it the tightest possible code, but like, it's just, if I have a bitmap, this is how I'm going to draw it. It supports transparency. So I decided to play around with isometric designs. So here's like a floor tile. Here's like maybe like a blue carpet or something, or like water. I don't know. My son thought this was lava. It's supposed to be wood, like wood grain. Yeah, sure. And then you can see I have like a little preview here to kind of see how it tiles, and like that obviously updates in real time. Yeah, so you can kind of boot this up. And this is still, I'm able to leverage a lot of the stuff that I built for Apple II. The MAME integration, you know, a lot of the assembler frame. Like in this past month, I also built like the assembler, the 65816 assembler. Like that was not really all that much. You know, here's just the opcode list. There's, you know, 256 different things. Basically every byte means something in 65816. But yeah, it's like 150 lines to of like the processor specific stuff. Yeah, I just have like a command here, and I can just upload, you know, compile and upload my code directly.
Mark is asking, does the Apple IIgs not have a tiled graphics mode?
It does not. It's just a stupid frame buffer. It has nothing. It has a you know, a block of memory, and every byte of that memory is 2 pixels, 2 16-color pixels, and that is all it does. There is also the one thing that's kind of neat is that it has for every scan line, you can actually like switch between a 320 width or a 640 width pixel mode. And then there are 16 different palettes, and so for every scan line you can change which palette is active. And that's it. That's what you get. So like most of the stuff for the 2GS is and this is running at a slower speed CPU. Everything is, you know, bottlenecked through the CPU, which slows down to 1 megahertz when it's writing to video memory, and it's 3 megahertz when it's running at top speed, which is still, I think, slower than the Super Nintendo. It is not a fast machine. It is not a games machine. The fact that anyone has like been able to like eke anything interesting in terms of performance out of this thing is kind of unbelievable. There's a Wolfenstein 3D port for the 2GS. You basically can't run it without a third-party accelerator to speed up your processor to like 7 or 12 megahertz. Those still cost like $500 and like are incredibly complicated and finicky. Like you can't just like overclock it. Like it's this incredibly it's a weird system. But yeah, so here I drew some tiles over top of each other, kind of one after another. And it's not super fast, but it you know, it drew. I don't know why it's usually faster than this, but I think my laptop doing the encoding as well is maybe slowing down MAME. But I'm just kind of like, this is with literally compiled code writing direct, you know, code that is literally just writing constants directly to memory as fast as it possibly can. You can see I'm like not clearing out when, you know, I'm not like clearing the screen in between. I'm just writing pixels as fast as I possibly can here, and it is not quick. But if you look at my code here, I can like, not my code. This is my code. I can say like, give you an example. I can say Alt B, and that'll set a breakpoint in MAME for me for that particular symbol. And you can see here's the assembly code for this tile. The first thing it does is it loads 3 different registers with the most common byte, word, 16-bit number patterns that it's going to write, so that those operations can be smaller and faster. And I can step through that. And then it messes with the stack pointer. This is whenever it's doing something with transparency, it has to load what's there first. It loads it off the stack, and then it does a bit mask to clear any the pixels that it wants to draw over top, and then it calls an OR operation, bitwise OR, with the pixels it actually wants to draw on top of that, and then it stores it back, and it just keeps going like that. This is just drawing lots of these are kind of, until we get a run of 4 pixels in a row, then that's the way it works. And here's this push effective address, PEA, it's push this value onto the stack. PHD, that's push the D register onto the stack. And you just run through this. It's just a bunch of code.
I love how you're just and it just does this thing, and away you go, Bob's your uncle, right?
I mean, this took me a lot of I really didn't want to do this. But just the more I read, the more it was if I just I could just do this once, and I can, and it's going to be broadly useful. I have to write this sprite compiler or whatever, once. It's very flexible. You just kind of pass it, any width, any height. The width has to be a multiple of 4. Beyond that, whatever. And then it's very, I just call draw object with this thing that gets compiled. And now I don't have to think about how to draw things on the screen anymore. That part is done, basically. There's no more tricks I have to worry about. And so it was in the end, it was, and a lot of information is out there about how to do this. There's a really, really, truly wonderful, the algorithm for this has a name. It's called Mr. Sprite. And let me, come on. Why is everything so slow when I'm streaming to Discord? I don't understand. And this was basically developed, as far as I can tell, by a couple of people from France. Call themselves Brutal Deluxe Software. And they have a very, very detailed, here is exactly how this tech works. They have the compiler that generates, more conventional assembly code or whatever. But it's here's exactly how the Apple II 2GS graphics hardware works. Here's exactly how you do this. Here's some example sprites. This is from Barbarian, I think, is the game on the 2GS. Yep. Yeah. It's here's how you do masking. We could create a sprite sheet. Walks you through kind of the algorithm for each kind of nibble, each 4 bits, kind of what it needs to be for masking.
Oh, this is cool. As a person that also loves Barbarian and all this shit, this particular page is speaking to me right now.
Yeah. So if you're into this stuff, this is, I'm basically just doing this. I'm not doing anything kind of original. And they're here's kind of all the different kind of cases, right? The red pixel here is a full, byte or a word where you just draw it. Here's where there's some transparency, so you have to do this other slower operation. And when it's green, it means you don't have to draw anything at all, so it doesn't cost any CPU cycles. And they literally, their tool will output these graphics so that you can kind of tell how fast it's going to be. You want to see a lot of red, and if you're seeing a lot of blue or whatever, then it's that's going to slow me down. Because they literally it comes down to how many cycles per pixel, how low can I make that number? That's literally all that matters. So yeah, I basically just read this and like implemented it. Here's a bunch of different like things you could do on the Apple IIgs if you were a better artist than me, or wanted to steal graphics from people who are better artists than me. They're like, here's a demo where I'm, I think this is a Metal Slug. And like the other thing is like size doesn't matter, right? Like you can take these big screen filling sprites and just draw them exactly the same way, because that's just the fastest possible way. There's no better way. There's no trick. You just do it. So that's kind of a weird. It's a lot more like programming a modern graphic system where like I really don't care what size something is on the screen.
Yeah.
But except like it's still like brutally restricted because it's going to be slow if you're pushing a lot of pixels. Like you can't have a lot of layering necessarily without really slowing down. The fill rate is awful, but you can make your pieces as big as you want. That's whatever. So anyway, that's what I've been working on, and like it's been fun. I'm enjoying it. And yeah, I really like that I wrote this stupid compiler, but it's also an extensible compiler, so I can put other compilers in it, like the graphics, the sprite compiler is literally, this is a fennel function that returns some assembly code that's just in the middle of my regular, my program. It's just part of it. It's a module in my, I can mix this stuff up very seamlessly. Which lets me kind of make things modular in a really nice way. Anyway, that's what I've been working on. I'm drawing, weird tiles. Working on my weird tools. And it's fun and exciting. And that's all I got.
I love it.
Yeah.
This is so cool. One of my favorite things about when you come on is I never know if it's going to be, hey, check out this cool pixel art thing that I made for the Apple, or it's going to be, hey, look, we can now talk to you. We've done some crazy compiler thing. You cover multiple levels. It's very good. Very good stuff.
I like to jump around, for sure.
Was this like, question in the back of my mind, was this one actually fun? Or was it more just like, oh, we're solving some interesting problems here? Was it actually fun?
So the compiler part, it was fun when I had one data type. I'll put it that way. So I originally, my stupid compiler was going to be like, everything's a 16-byte, 16-bit number, because that fits in a register on my 16-bit computer. And I know, I've written fourths. I know that 16 bits are all you need. You don't really need to deal with bigger than that. What screwed me was that on the Apple IIgs there is a bunch of ROM routines, which is called toolboxes. And so like this is basically like a header file that I've generated by reading. There are these huge reference manuals for here is all the ROM routines on the Apple IIgs. Here's how you load all these toolbox, and they're called the toolbox functions, and they're called in this very standardized way where like they all have a numerical ID that you load into a register. You jump to this particular location in memory, except that they all assume you're using Pascal or C and have like data types, and like anything that has a pointer has a 32-bit value as the pointer, because you can access more than 64 kilobytes of memory, and so obviously you want to be able to talk about those things when you're talking about it generally. And so like anytime I have these long things, and it was just like very quick, and you need to use these in order to be software that anyone is going to want to run. To be launched from GSOS, or even just doing, I don't know, memory allocation, or there are useful functions. It has like a bunch of math functions in it that I might use temporarily if they don't need to be too fast or something. I used it for printing out debug values or whatever, like, because there's a number to string function. I don't want to write that. There's the whole memory management subsystem for like allocating and freeing blocks of memory. If you want to exist among other Apple IIgs programs, you absolutely need to interact with that. And so it was like I started writing this stuff, and I'm like not doing 32-bit anything, and eventually it was just like, no, I need it. And that made things so much more complicated in the compiler. But I did eventually get that done, and it works reasonably well. It generates awful code whenever you're dealing with 32-bit values. Like, it's just the stupidest. And that bugs me in the back of my head. It's still faster than, and the fourth code would have been. Because, like, the thing that I kind of reading how the processor works, because I was going to write another fourth thing for it, because that's what I've been doing. Mm-hmm. And I just, like, eventually, like, realized that I understood everything well enough that I could literally just generate machine code that would run, would be relatively compact and would, like, run much faster than a fourth would, and just look much nicer. Be something that I could show to people and be like, hey, yeah, here's a while loop. It looks like a while loop. The fact that the comparison operator is in the beginning, this still, you can figure out this means y is less than 37, right? Yeah. Like, that's not too bad. I can have local variables, which, the Chuck Moore, the inventor of Forth, he'd say I'm living in sin for having named local variables. What am I doing? Obviously, everything should be global. But, it's nice, too. I like having local variables, and it does make the generated code a lot simpler, because as soon as it's on the stack, there's literally an opcode for being like, get the thing at, offset 7 from the stack and put it into my register. So I can work with it. And so it's like, okay, well, what's a local variable? It's a thing you push on a stack, and then it's there, and you can talk about it, and then eventually when you're done with it, you pop it off the stack. Like, it's not really different from how Forth does stuff. So, like, that stuff was fun. And the fact that, like, this works and, like, looks like code is delightful to me. Like, I can show that, the fact that I can show this to someone and, like, they could understand it is outstanding.
You got a main function.
Yeah, exactly. I have a main function. And it, like, does stuff. It just makes, like, a bunch of library calls to, like, okay, start up quick draw. Oh, that was the other thing. If I want to, like, read the keyboard, I need to use a ROM routine. I can't just, like, poke around a random register in memory and be like, yeah, okay, here's the last thing the user typed. It's like, no, there's like a serial protocol now. There's the AD device bus and, like, complicated stuff. It's like, okay, well, I need to actually deal with that. If I want to be able to, like, use a mouse or a keyboard with my game, which I kind of do. So I kind of had to do this toolbox integration, and it just, it had to be the way it was.
So wait, was this fun?
Yeah, no, I'm having a real good time. It's yeah, and just, like, the fact that I was able to do this kind of in spare time in a month is just, I look at it and it's, that's not normal. That's not how these things are supposed to work. But it's a really super satisfying to be like, okay, what's the dumbest thing that, I know I can, throw together kind of quickly, but it's not a hack. It's just simple, and, like, I've been working that way for so long that I'm, that's all actually kind of clicking and all actually kind of firing for me. And the fact that I can reuse so much of this architecture that I built up for the Apple II and all these tools and stuff, you know, I haven't updated the tile editor, the map editor to be like isometric yet, but I'll play with that a bit. It shouldn't be that complicated.
Yeah, you have a lot of practice with this stuff by now.
Yeah, so like the fact that I can bring this up so quickly is and like facing a lot of challenges, kind of new challenges too, that you know really weren't a problem with my last platform. You know, the shape of things is always different, and that always keeps it interesting too, right? And like there's also this little voice in the back of my brain that's like, okay, well, you know, once I do this, then I have a compiler for the Super Nintendo too. I just have to like write useful libraries for it.
Yeah, that's
cool. You know, instead of dumping to, you know, Apple IIgs push things onto the stack, it's like, okay, well, instead we push this into ROM or whatever, and you know, do whatever the Super Nintendo graphics hardware does. I don't know, but like the base is there. I have a, you know, graphics editor. I have a compiler. I have a base of these tools, and like I have MAME integration, which means I have a debugger. You know, I can leverage so much of this stuff already, and just kind of keep expanding the scope just a little bit at a time. So I enjoy that process a lot.
Jeremy, this is awesome. Thank you so much for showing this off.
Yeah, of course.
And for stepping in. This was like a little last minute introduction for Jeremy, who messaged us like yesterday to come on in, and always welcome. Always welcome.
Yeah, no, it was, you know, I kind of wished I had more to show, but I have lots to talk about, so.
There you go. Got some Doritos in the chat for Jeremy. I'm throwing your Twitter handle up on the screen here. Everyone go follow Jeremy. Follow him on the internet, all that good stuff. We are going to round out this show. The other organizers here want to jump off camera. Jeremy, you're welcome to stick around if you like.
Sure.
You're basically one of us. Pressing some buttons here.
Beep, boop, 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 beep.
Oh, there's everybody. There we go. Too many computers.
That's
here.
not over. I can't be fooled.
There we go. This was fun. Did you guys have fun? Who had fun?
Yeah, good time.
Yes, this was a lovely direct.
Who had the most fun? Probably Yuffie.
Probably Yuffie.
Probably Yuffie. Eric Billingsley, you should turn your camera on. Say hi to us.
Is it not on?
His is on. Yours is
Yeah, we can see the cat.
Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Oh, well.
The Derek camera is almost not on.
Mine's on stream. Anyways,
Oh,
this
I
has
see.
been great. Thanks so much for joining us. We will be back another time, probably next month, if my powers of deduction serve me well. We will be back in October. Should we do something fun for October?
Something spooky. We could dress up.
Can't remember. Is there a holiday in October?
Is there ever? It's called my birthday. If you have a horror game or a game about my birthday and would love to come on the show next month, please reach out. Dirty Rectangles, dirty-rectangles.com/Discord. You can jump on our Discord and ask to present on our show, or find us on Twitter at Dirty Rectangles or at Rectangles TO for the Toronto crew. What else? What else we got?
Just trying to be as scary as I can be.
Spooky.
Very spooky.
Yeah,
pretty spooky. This recording will be up on YouTube. You can check out all of our past Dirty Rectangles online there, as well as some other shows that we got going on. This has been fun. Any parting words from anyone in the room here?
I just want to thank everybody who came on. All of our guests were wonderful.
Hell
this edition.
Yeah.
Doritos in the chat for everybody. Everyone gets Doritos
Doritos
tonight.
for everybody.
You know what? We're just giving out those Doritos tonight. If you want some Doritos, feel free to toss some Doritos in the chat, even for yourself. It's all good. It's late. You deserved it. It's been a long time. Okay, we're just babbling. Shall we get out of here? Yes.
Do it. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everybody. See you next month.
Bye.
Bye.